Welcome to the NPTEL course Canning Technology and Value Addition of Seafood. In today's session, we'll be discussing about canning procedure for various seafood products. Under this session, we'll be discussing about step-by-step process, variations that can be seen in item-wise canning of different seafoods. We'll also see what are the different types of seafoods that can be used for canning, and the pre-processing methods that are generally employed before processing the products. What are the different pre-processing methods that can be adopted, and what are the different additives that are added to the seafoods during canning process. Now coming to the first process, step-by-step process. This is a general step and it is same for almost all the products, whether it is fruits or vegetables or fish or meat. So the first step includes raw material reception. After receiving the product, it is prepared for canning. The raw materials are prepared. Either it can be, if it is fruits or vegetables, it need to be cleaned. The unwanted parts, dirt, everything need to be removed. If it is fish, again the degutting or deheading need to be done. So it's again cleaning process. And also in the same way in the meat also the cleaning process. So that's the preparation part where the raw material is prepared for the further steps, and it includes all the basic steps. And after preparation of the raw material, the product or the raw material, it will be canned or it will be filled in the can and or in the bottle. If it is juice or beverage, it is filled in the bottle. And after adding the product samples in the can, it is covered with a liquid that can be brine or oil, or it can also be sauces. We find sardines with tomato sauce, so we can use sauce, tomato sauce also. After adding the liquid, the enclosed air or the trapped air inside the can, it is removed by exhausting, and after that the cans are sealed, and the walls or anything which is sticking to the wall or adhering to the wall, it is removed by washing and wiping out and drying it, and then it is subjected to sterilization or pasteurization, and then it is cooled. This step is very important because mainly we are concentrating on killing the bacteria during sterilization and or pasteurization. So cooling helps, it helps in giving a cold shock, and thereby the microbes does not grow. And after cooling, it is dried again and then labeled, and it is palleting or it is stacked and then stored, and it is stored for a period of time during which it is checked that no microbes are growing, and only after that it is marketed. So these are the general steps. And also cans need to be received, and we need to get a certification from the suppliers that cans are proper and they meet the requirements, and these cans need to be washed and it need to be prepared for the process. So that also has to be done simultaneously. Now these are the major types of fish that are canned. We find tuna, then sardine, salmon, mackerel, cod, anchovies and herrings. And in the case of tuna, we find albacore, skipjack, yellowfin and big eye. You will find their scientific names along with the common names. In case of tuna, the raw materials are received. Generally, the fish, they are caught in bulk, so they cannot be kept as such. They need to be frozen. So the frozen material, it reaches the plant for the processing or for canning process. So when it reaches to the plant, it has to be thawed out, and thawing need to be done properly. There should not be any direct contact between the water and the food product. So after thawing, it is deheaded and the gut content is removed so that further microbial contaminations can be prevented. After deheading and degutting, it is washed, it is bled so that any traces of blood is there, it can be removed, and then it is cooked or baked. And only after baking the skin is removed, and skin and other parts are removed. Because the skin is a bit thicker for the tuna, it can be removed easily after baking. So after baking, removal of the fins and other parts of the skins, it is sectioned, it is cut into small pieces, and as per the requirement, it can be converted to different forms. You can also make it into flakes, and then it is filled in the can, and it is pressed. And then a can is filled. It can be brine or it can be oil, and after that it is subjected to exhausting, sterilization, and after sterilization the cans need to be cooled and labeled, and it need to be stored before it is being marketed. After thawing and butchering process, tuna is cooked using atmospheric steam, and it is generally done at 100 to 102 degrees centigrade. This is the baking condition, and this helps in removing the skin easily. And also the cooking conditions or cooking temperatures, it vary along the length of the or backbone of the fish. So it is like 50 to 70 degree variations can be seen. It is along the length of the fish. And also it takes time for the temperature to reach to the hardest or the thickest portion. So that also need to be taken care of while canning the tuna. Now there are various styles in which it can be packed. One is a solid pack. It consists of usually the tuna, either sides of the tuna, it is cut into loins. Just like the higher animals, it is also labeled as loins. And here in the solid pack, the loins are cut into transverse segments, and it is placed in the can, and you don't place any segment parallel to this thing. So it is just filling the can. The solid contents are packed in the vertical position, and there are no parallel segments are kept. And in the chunk style, 50% is the chunk, and half-inch size smaller flakes can be added along with chunk, but the major part will be chunk, that is 50% will be the chunk portion. And in the grated style, the sizes are much smaller. It is like half-inch or less than half-inch, and these are packed, but we need to be careful that it doesn't become paste when we do the sterilization. So that care need to be taken. Again, the next style is flakes, and flakes again, it is smaller chunks which are obtained during grating. And usually the filling media is oil, vegetable oil or brine. And the most common defect that can be observed in the tuna is green meat formation. That is because we are using the low quality products for the canning. So that if we are going for a fresh sample of fresh fish, we can avoid green coloring in the meat. Now here we can see the CCPs. In case of canning, 4 CCPs are there. The first one is at the reception. Then we have to check whether it is meeting the critical limits. Like if it is, we are bringing the frozen fish, then it should be, the temperature should be below 18 degrees centigrade. And if you are going to use fresh fish, then it should be in the chilled conditions. And also the histamine content should be below 50 ppm. And mercury should be within the limits. It should be below 0.8 ppm. Also, can is another requirement which is received. Can specifications also need to be assured, and we need to get certifications from the supplier. If any of these things, these requirements or critical limits are not met, then immediately the supplier need to be informed, and we have to reject the sample or the material. So, and in between, this can be done by monitoring the thing, and corrective actions can be required wherever it is required. And so similarly, we have to check the metals. If any metal traps, metals are there, that need to be removed. And occasionally metal detectors need to be cleaned so that any defect is there in the machinery, that can be averted or can be removed. And again, heat processing is most critical here, and because this is a heat processed cooked product which can be consumed as such, it is not necessary that we have to recook it. So when we do heat processing, targeting the botulinum bacteria and the critical limits for botulinum should be checked, and we should see that it is meeting the requirements, and all the time temperature relationship, or it has to be maintained thoroughly. And then next or the last CCP here is cooling and drying. This is because we are using water. So water can transmit microbes to the container and or to the surface of the container. So that can be prevented by using potable water or by checking the chlorine content. So the critical limit here being set for chlorine is 0.5 milligram per liter. So regular intervals, these things need to be checked by the technologist or the designated person, and is not meeting the limit, then actions need to be taken accordingly. So these are the 4 CCPs in the tuna canning process. And this is the international standard for tuna canned in oil, and it was published in 1967. Accordingly, heavy metals like arsenic, lead and copper, the limits were set for this. It is 11 ppm for arsenic, and lead it is 10 ppm, copper 100 ppm. And zinc and tin, it is 50 and 250 ppm respectively. Mercury, it should be 0.5. And microbiological activity, it should meet the requirements. And histamine content should be below or around 20 ppm. It should be below 20 ppm because tuna, it belongs to Scombroidae family. And histamine poisoning is a very significant, or it's a very important thing that need to be considered and it comes generally from the scombroid fishes. Histamine content is more or histamine formation has happened, it indicates the spoilage of the product. So this also has to be checked, and is not within limits, then immediately material has to be returned. Now coming to the next fish, sardine or mackerel. Here we can see in sardine category we have Atlantic herring, pilchard, then Peruvian anchovy, and we also have Indian oil sardine. Indian oil sardine, it is rich in oil, that's why it is called oil sardine. In the case of mackerel, we find chub or Pacific mackerel, Spanish mackerel, Atlantic mackerel, and Indian mackerel. So these are the different types of sardine and mackerel that are used for canning. And this is the protocol for canning of sardine. Get the raw material. Again, it can be in the frozen form. If it is in the frozen form, then it needs to be thawed. If it is in the fresh form, we can go directly to the washing and cleaning. And we do the weighing because to know the yield after cleaning and other processes. So since sardine, it contains scales, it need to be removed, descaling process. And after descaling, we go for nobbing. Nobbing is the process where you remove the head and the gut region together. So after nobbing, it is size cutting. It is reduced to the required size. So after nobbing, the fish is cut into small pieces, and I'll show you how it is done. This is the can. It needs to be filled. So in the can, before filling, like when you are filling the can, we give a headspace, and headspace is given to maintain the vacuum during canning. And when we cut the pieces, it should not cover the entire height of the can. So it should be slightly below the can, and it should be like the liquid should cover the contents, because if it is not covering, then it will cause retort burn in the later stages. Also, we need to give the headspace. So considering these two things, the size of the product need to be adjusted accordingly. After cutting to the required length, it is washed again and then weighed, and brining is done. During the brining process, it is immersed into the saturated salt solution for 8 to 10 minutes because it removes the unwanted slime or blood stains that are attached to it, that will be washed off during brining, and it will also improve the textural properties of the product. So after brining, it is again washed to remove the adhering salt. Any extra salt is there on the surface, that will be removed during washing, and then it is pre-cooked. And again, pre-cooking, it is done 100 degrees centigrade in steam and for 30 minutes. And then it is filled in the can, and we do the hot filling. Oil in hot state is filled inside into the can, and brine can also be used along with for filling the can. And once we have completed the filling, it is seamed, and then we go for exhausting, retorting, and then it is cooled. And so when we bring the temperature down, it should not be slow cooling, it should be brought down to 37 to 38 degrees centigrade. So immediately after retorting, cooling should be done immediately. And once the cooling has completed, the surface should be dried thoroughly, and it should be labeled and stored. The drying is important because any droplets of water on the surface of can, it will cause rusting or spoilages on the surface of the can. So that's why we go for drying. And labeling is also done to understand what has been packed and when it has been done. So to know all these things, the labels are put, and then we are storing it in the storage room. This is the protocol for mackerel canning. So here we get the fresh fish. It is whole, and it is again, if it is in the frozen form, it need to be thawed, and if it is in the fresh form, then it need to be washed. This is done to remove the dirt, adhering dirt or unwanted slime or any material which is attached to the surface. So that need to be removed. Again, since mackerel does not contain scales, we don't have to do descaling. We can directly go for it, but we can go for dressing where we remove the fins and other things. We can also remove the head and belly region or the gut contents, and then wash it thoroughly to remove the blood stains. Again, cut into small pieces according to the requirement of the can, then wash it again, and then we subject it to brining. Again, just like the brining process in the sardine, here also mackerel pieces are soaked into the brine, saturated brine, for 8 to 10 minutes, and this helps in removing the curdling or curd formation, because mackerel, it contains soluble proteins, and they aggregate when they are reacting with the brining. So if you are not doing this brining process, instead of this directly going for canning, this curd formation, it will stick to the internal surface of the container, and which will cause spoilage or rusting of the can in the later stage. So therefore, we need to remove the soluble proteins before we go for canning. Then it is again dipping. After finishing the brining, it has to be dipped in fresh water to remove the excess salt, and it has to be packed in the can. Again, we add salt, dry salt, or we can add other filling materials like oil, or we can also go for brine, and then steam it. Just like other protocols, we also go for retorting, cooling, drying, and labeling and storage. So its later part is almost similar to the other protocols. Now, canning of sardine or sardine-like fish, it is either done by Mediterranean method, that is raw pack method, or Norwegian method, that is hot smoking method. So these two methods can be done. And in the Mediterranean method, it is the fish is washed first in the brine. It is knobbed. So knobbing is the procedure where we remove the head and the gut content. So usually in the Mediterranean method, it is achieved mechanically. And after knobbing, again it is brined. It is put in the brine, and then it is packed in the can and cooked at 100 degrees centigrade at the atmospheric pressure, normal atmospheric pressure, using steam. And pre-cooking is done usually for 15 to 30 minutes, and then it is cut into small pieces. And after pre-cooking, the cans are inverted to drain the liquor that comprises of fat and water. The liquid part is removed in the Mediterranean method. In the Norwegian method, after knobbing and brining, both methods are similar to the Mediterranean method. So after these two processes, it is hot smoked and dried, and smoking is done at 80 degrees centigrade for 2 hours. This gives additional flavor to the product, and the flavor also depends upon the kind of wood being used for smoking purpose. The smoke gets deposited on the surface of the fish. It improves the flavor of the product. And after smoking, it is packed into the can, and filling media like brine or vegetable oil are added, and then we go for the retorting. So in this case, the CCPs are receiving of raw material, then container closure, sterilization, cooling of the sterile cans, and storage. So these are the 5 CCP. And again, in the raw material part, we need to be careful what kind of material we are collecting. Also, we need to see that the histamine is within limits, like how we discussed it in the tuna. If it is not within limits, it need to be returned. For the fresh fish, the temperature should be below 6 degrees centigrade, and also the histamine content should be below 50 ppm. Again, in the container closure, we have to be careful. We have to get guarantee from the supplier the containers are good. If also we have to check whether it is leak proof, the seams are perfect or not, that need to be checked. Again, the sterilization temperatures. What is the temperature for every container? Based on the kind of container, the sterilization conditions will change. So we have to follow the standardized methods, and that need to be checked and monitored regularly. Also, the cooling conditions, the potable water need to be used. Also, the chlorine content need to be checked. It should be 1 ppm, and then stacking of the cans, it should be done at 40 degrees centigrade. So all these things need to be checked regularly, monitored, it need to be verified, and if any error is there, it need to be corrected. The corrective actions need to be recorded. And this is the international standard for sardine. And again, you can see for sardine and mackerel, the international standards are same. The limits are being same, and it is for mercury, it is 0.5 ppm, zinc 50 ppm, copper 10 ppm, arsenic 1 ppm. So these are the heavy metals. Lead is also heavy metal, 1 ppm. And then microbiological requirements, it should be commercially sterile. And also in plate containers, it should be 250 ppm. And in the other container, it should be 50 ppm. So these are the international standards laid in 2001 for sardine and mackerel. So these are the standards for mackerel, and the standards are same for sardine. This is an international standard. You can see on the top the numbers, the code is given, and this standard was laid in 2001 for both sardine and mackerel. And in these slides, we had seen the canning of different commercial fishes like tuna, mackerel, sardine, and we'll continue in the next session with crustaceans. Thank you.